The day my grandfather mysteriously disappeared without a trace was the day everything changed. No search, no explanation, just silence. Within days, my father and brother moved in like vultures, seizing full control of his company as if they had been waiting for the moment all along. Something about it felt too smooth, too planned. And I couldn't shake the feeling that they knew more than they were letting on. Can you imagine the gut-wrenching shock of seeing someone you thought was dead for 5 long years suddenly walk back into your life? What if their return didn't bring relief, but instead ripped open a wound of betrayal so deep, it shattered your entire family to its core, exposing a shocking truth about the people you loved most? Hello, my name is Adam Marlowe, and I'm 33 years old. I live in a small apartment in Austin, Texas, where the scent of roasted coffee from the shop downstairs drifts through my window every morning. I work as an education consultant, a job that might sound fancy, but it's really about helping schools make ends meet while still nurturing big dreams. It's not glamorous, but it feels right, like I'm doing something kind. Maybe that's why I've always refused to step into the empire my father and brother run, Marlowe Global. It's a name that sounds so cold, especially when you know it used to be Whitmore Dynamics, my grandfather Arthur Whitmore's company. I don't usually dwell on the past, but if I don't tell you this story, you won't understand why my heart always feels like it's being squeezed by something I can't quite name. Austin, this city of oak-lined streets and vibrant music, was once the place where I grew up, wrapped in my mother's love and guided by my grandfather's stern wisdom. Now, it just feels like a mirror, reflecting the deep cracks in my family. Cracks I've tried to mend so many times, but never could. Let me tell you about the people who shaped my life, and about the secret that's been smoldering, just waiting for the day it would finally explode. Austin in 2025 isn't the small, artsy town I remember. It's a tech hub now, all gleaming glass buildings and streets choked with Teslas. Downtown, the headquarters of Marlowe Global, that deep blue glass tower with its cold, stark logo, stands tall. It used to be my grandfather Arthur Whitmore's pride and joy. He built Whitmore Dynamics from absolutely nothing, transforming it into a beacon of ethics and sustainability. They focused on infrastructure and clean energy, from cutting-edge solar panels to water recycling projects for aid regions. My grandfather always said, "Making money isn't hard, but making money while keeping your conscience? That's the real challenge." I remember, as a kid, he'd take me and my brother, Garrett, through the company's polished hallways. He'd point to the photos on the walls, projects in Africa, solar plants in Nevada, and talk about the responsibility of a businessman. "You boys must remember," he'd say, his voice deep and solid as stone. "Money is a tool, not a goal." I, just an 8-year-old, would nod eagerly, even if I didn't fully grasp it. But Garrett, my older brother, he'd just offer a faint smile, his eyes already glinting with an ambition I'd only truly recognize years later. Then, in 2020, everything changed. My grandfather went missing. He was on a hunting trip in Colorado, a place he often went to. "Talk to nature," as he'd say. He never came back. The police were called. Helicopters scoured the mountains, rescue teams searched every cave. Nothing. No body, no clues, just the wool cap he always wore, found by a shallow stream. They concluded he was dead, maybe attacked by a wild animal or fallen into a ravine. But I never believed it. Arthur Whitmore wasn't the kind of man who just vanished. He was disciplined, meticulous, every step carefully calculated. But I was the only one in the family who refused to accept that story. And because of that, I became the outsider. I'm not the type who fits in at wine-soaked galas or stuffy boardroom meetings. I prefer quiet mornings, reading in my small apartment, or sitting with my mother, listening to her stories about her youth, when she and my grandfather planted the first oak trees in our family garden. I studied education at the University of Texas, graduated with honors. But instead of joining Whitmore Dynamics, as my father and brother expected, I chose my own path. My father, Charles Marlowe, called it betrayal. My brother Garrett? He just blurted, "You're an idiot, Adam. You've got an empire in your hands and you choose to do the work of dreamers." I don't blame them. My father and Garrett have their reasons for thinking that way. Whitmore Dynamics, or Marlowe Global now, became a money-making machine. But I started noticing the stains, the dirty projects creeping into the company after my grandfather's disappearance. Shady deals with politicians, factories failing environmental standards, money from unclear sources. I once argued with my father during a family dinner when he bragged about an oil drilling project in Alaska. "Dad, Grandpa would never have agreed to this," I said, my voice trembling with anger. He just looked at me, his eyes cold as steel. "Arthur's dead, Adam. This is my time." I left the house that night with a suitcase of clothes and a heavy heart. Since then, I've lived on my own, only occasionally visiting my mother, the only person in the family who still tied me to what I once called home. My father, Charles Marlowe, whose real name is Carlos Marin, is a man full of contradictions. He came from Colombia, immigrating to the U.S. as a young man with dreams of a better life and a sharp mind. My grandfather, Arthur, saw his talent when he was just a young engineer working on a small Whitmore Dynamics project. Grandpa mentored him, gave him opportunities to rise, and eventually gave him my mother, Clara Whitmore, in marriage, despite the objections of the entire Whitmore clan. "Carlos is a man of the future," Grandpa once said. "He's got fire in his eyes." My father didn't let Grandpa down, at least in the early years. He worked day and night, turning Grandpa's ideas into reality. But when my mother gave birth to me and Garrett, something in him changed. I still remember the look in his eyes when Grandpa announced his retirement plans, intending to hand over control to an independent board rather than a single person. My father didn't say anything, but his hand gripped his wine glass so tightly I thought it would shatter. After Grandpa went missing, my father quickly seized control. He renamed the company Marlowe Global, erasing Grandpa's legacy. The photos of projects in Africa disappeared from the hallways. The values Grandpa had set, ethics, sustainability, were replaced with new words: profit, expansion, power. I look at my father now and wonder where the man who knelt to propose to my mother, who held me and Garrett in his arms, has gone. And then there's my mother. To describe her, I picture a shimmering glass flower, beautiful but fragile, though she'd never admit it. Clara Whitmore Marlowe, the only daughter of Arthur Whitmore, grew up under her father's protective wing. She's kind, loves nature, and has a heart so big it feels like it doesn't belong in this world. When she married my father, many in the Whitmore family objected, calling him an opportunistic immigrant. But she didn't care. "Love doesn't need a resume," she once told me when I was a kid and asked why she chose him. But after Grandpa went missing, she changed. She became quiet. Her eyes always tinged with sadness. She spoke less, smiled less, and her health began to fade. I know she misses Grandpa, her father, who was not just the family's pillar, but her closest confidant. Every time I visit, she sits by the window, looking out at the now withered garden, and tells me stories about him. "Adam, your grandfather was a special man," she says, her voice trembling. "He'd never abandon us." I want to believe her, but 5 years is a long time. Still, every time I look into her eyes, I see a faint spark of hope, as if she knows something I don't. Garrett, my brother, is 2 years older than me. But the gap between us feels like a century. Garrett is a carbon copy of our father, ambitious, cold, and always able to bend others to his will. When we were kids, we were close. He taught me how to tie a tie, throw a baseball, and get back up after a fall. But as we grew up, Garrett changed. He started looking at me with disdain, as if I were weak, unworthy of the Marlowe name. Garrett joined Whitmore Dynamics right after college. He quickly became our father's right-hand man. And when Grandpa went missing, he was the first to support renaming the company. "Whitmore is the past," he said at a family meeting, his voice sharp as a knife. "Marlowe is the future." I tried to argue, but he just smirked. "Adam, you don't understand how the world works. Garrett doesn't just want power. He craves recognition, to stand above everyone. I know he's preparing for a big move, a global IPO for Marlowe Global that will catapult him and our father to the top of the financial elite. But every time I look into his eyes, I see an emptiness where family love used to be. And then there's the man I admired most, my grandfather, Arthur Whitmore. He was a man all of Austin respected. At 75, he was still tall, with white hair and eyes sharp as a hawk's. He wasn't just the founder of Whitmore Dynamics, he was a symbol of integrity. He turned down dozens of lucrative contracts because they didn't align with his values. "Money can buy a lot," he'd say, "but it can't buy a good night's sleep." The day he went missing, my world collapsed. I remember that morning when my father got the call from the rescue team. He sank into a chair, his face pale, but I saw no tears. Garrett was busy on the phone with lawyers and the board. Only my mother cried, sobbing so hard I had to hold her tightly to keep her from collapsing. The police searched for weeks but found nothing. The headlines blared. "Whitmore Dynamics founder mysteriously disappears." Then they declared him dead. But I didn't believe it. I couldn't. In the nights after his disappearance, I'd dream of him, covered in wounds, calling for help. I'd run toward him, but the closer I got, the farther he seemed. I'd wake up sweating, my heart pounding. I've asked myself countless times, is he really dead? And if he's alive, where is he? Why hasn't he come back? These questions haunted me day after day, and I couldn't find the answers. My family, or rather, what remained of it, fell apart the day my grandfather went missing. My father and Garrett seized the opportunity to transform Whitmore Dynamics into Marlowe Global, as if they wanted to erase every trace of him. My mother, Clara, sank deeper into her grief, while I became an outcast, pushed to the sidelines by the very people I loved most. But I couldn't just stand by. I couldn't let everything continue to slide into darkness. In the months following my grandfather's disappearance, I began to realize that my father and Garrett didn't just want to run the company. They wanted to own it, completely and absolutely. I still remember the first shareholders' meeting I attended, just weeks after the rescue team called off the search for my grandfather. I went there hoping to hear a clear plan, a commitment that the company would carry on his mission. Instead, I witnessed a carefully staged performance. My father stood at the podium, dressed in a sleek black suit, his voice deep and commanding. "Whitmore Dynamics has entered a new era," he declared, his gaze sweeping over the crowd of shareholders like a king addressing his subjects. "We will expand. We will go global. And to do that, we need a new name. Marlowe Global." The room erupted in applause. I sat in the back row, clenching my fists so tightly that my nails dug into my palms. Garrett stood beside my father, wearing a smug smile, as if this was the moment he'd been waiting for his entire life. I wanted to stand up, to shout that they were betraying my grandfather, betraying the values this company was built on, but I couldn't. I just sat there, powerless, watching my father and brother erase my grandfather's legacy with a new name. After the meeting, Garrett approached me, still with that faint smile. "Adam, you're too late," he said, his voice dripping with mockery. "This isn't a place for dreamers." I didn't respond. I just stood up and walked away, carrying a burning anger in my chest. On the drive home, I thought about my grandfather, about his sharp eyes and warm, steady voice. He would never have let this happen, but he wasn't here anymore. Marlowe Global didn't take long to reveal its true face. Just a few months later, I started hearing rumors about the company's new projects. Projects my grandfather would have called crimes: a petrochemical plant in Louisiana dumping untreated waste straight into the river, a logging contract in the Amazon despite the company's previous commitments to environmental protection, and then an oil drilling project in Alaska, the one my father proudly boasted about at a family dinner as if it were his greatest achievement. I couldn't stay silent. That evening, at the sprawling family home in the Austin suburbs, I confronted my father. My mother sat at the head of the table, quietly stirring her cold soup. Garrett sipped his wine, his eyes fixed on me as if waiting to see what I'd do. "Dad, Grandpa would never have agreed to the Alaska project," I said, trying to keep my voice calm. "It goes against everything Whitmore Dynamics stood for." My father set down his wine glass and looked at me with icy eyes. Arthur's not here anymore. I'm running the company now, and I know how to make money. Make money by destroying the environment? By cozying up to corrupt politicians? I couldn't hold back anymore. Do you even know the cost of those deals? Garrett let out a dry laugh. Adam, you're such an idiot. The world doesn't run on your lofty ideals. Money is king, and we're doing what's necessary to keep this company at the top. My mother looked up, her eyes misty with tears. Adam, stop talking, she whispered. Just let it go. But I couldn't. Mom, I can't let them destroy Grandpa's legacy. I can't just stand by and watch. My father slammed the table, making the dishes rattle. Enough, Adam. If you don't want to be part of this family, then get out. I don't need a son who's always living in some moral fantasy. I stood up, my heart feeling like it was being crushed. My mother reached for me. But I shook my head. I'm sorry, Mom. I can't stay. I drove back to my apartment, tears streaming down my face. I wasn't crying because of my father's words, but because I felt like I'd lost everything. My family, my grandfather, and the belief that things would ever be okay again. In the years that followed, I lived like a shadow. I worked, met friends, but there was always an emptiness inside me that I couldn't fill. I rarely went home, only occasionally visiting my mother, who grew frilier with each passing day. Every time I saw her, I could feel her pain, the pain of a woman who had lost her father and been abandoned by her husband and eldest son in her own home. One time when I visited, she took my hand, her fingers cold and trembling. Adam, do you ever think your grandfather might still be alive? She asked, her voice faint as a passing breeze. I froze. Mom, what are you saying? She looked out at the withered garden, her eyes distant. Arthur was a strong man. He couldn't just vanish like that. Something's not right, Adam. I know it. I squeezed her hand, my heart pounding. I think so too, Mom, but I don't know what to do. No one believes me. She turned to look at me, a rare spark of hope in her eyes. You're my hope, Adam. You have to find the truth. Her words lit a small fire inside me. I started digging into old information about my grandfather's disappearance. I reread newspaper articles, police reports, and the notes I'd kept from 5 years ago. Everything pointed to one conclusion: no body, no concrete evidence. Just his wool cap, found too perfectly by the stream, as if someone wanted it to be found. I began to suspect something. But suspicion alone wasn't enough. I needed proof, and I didn't know where to start. While I was lost in unanswered questions, Marlowe Global kept growing. My father and Garrett appeared in the headlines, praised as visionary leaders. But I knew the truth. I heard rumors from my grandfather's old colleagues, people who had been fired or forced to resign. They talked about large sums of money being transferred overseas, deals signed in the shadows, and shady connections with powerful politicians. I tried reaching out to a few of them, but most refused to talk. Adam, you don't understand, one of my grandfather's old friends whispered over the phone. This company isn't Arthur's anymore. You need to be careful. Careful? I wasn't afraid, but I was alone. Every time I tried to talk to Garrett, he just smirked and called me paranoid. One time, in a rare moment when he agreed to meet me at a cafe in downtown Austin, I asked him directly, Garrett, do you know anything about Grandpa? Is there something you're hiding from me? He looked at me, his eyes cold. Adam, you need to grow up. He's dead. It happens. People die, and the world keeps spinning. If you want to live in the past forever, go ahead. But don't drag me and Dad down with you. I left that cafe feeling like I'd been stabbed in the heart. Garrett wasn't just my brother. He used to be my best friend, but now he looked at me like I was an enemy. Then, on a late October night, everything changed. I was sitting in my apartment, the light from the desk lamp illuminating the pile of papers in front of me. Outside, a gentle rain pattered down, blurring the glass window. The doorbell rang, sharp and sudden, making me jump. I glanced at the clock, nearly 10 p.m. Who would come at this hour? I wasn't expecting anyone, and my friends knew I didn't like being disturbed at night. I stood up, my heart pounding inexplicably fast. I walked to the door and peered through the peephole. A man stood there, his head covered by a hood, his face obscured in shadow. I hesitated, my hand on the doorknob, but then I opened the door, even though a part of me wanted to turn back and pretend I hadn't heard anything. The man looked up, and as the hallway light hit his face, I felt the blood in my veins freeze. Silver-white hair, hawk-like eyes, though now clouded by time and suffering. It was my grandfather, Arthur Whitmore. "Adam," he said, his voice low and hoarse, as if he hadn't spoken in a long time. "Can you let me in?" I stood frozen, unable to believe my eyes. "Grandpa," I stammered, feeling the ground beneath me give way. "You're alive." He smiled, a tired but warm smile. "Let's go inside, Adam. We have a lot to talk about." I let him into the apartment, still in shock. My grandfather sat down in the old armchair, taking off his hood to reveal a gaunt face etched with new wrinkles. He wore a worn wool coat, no longer the polished man in a suit I knew from Whitmore Dynamics. But his eyes, those eyes were still sharp, still full of resolve, as if nothing in the world could break him. I brewed a cup of hot tea and placed it in front of him, my hands trembling so much that I spilled a little on the table. "Grandpa, where have you been for the past 5 years?" I asked, my voice choking. "Everyone said you were dead. I tried to find you, but—" He raised a hand, signaling me to stop. "Adam, I know you never gave up. That's why I'm here tonight." He took a deep breath, as if steeling himself to tell a story he'd kept buried for too long. "But first, you need to promise me one thing. What I'm about to tell you, you can't tell anyone." I nodded, though my heart was pounding. "I promise, Grandpa, tell me." And so he began. 5 years ago, during that hunting trip in Colorado, everything had been orchestrated. He hadn't gone alone, as the newspapers reported. Charles, my father, and Garrett had gone with him. "They said it would be a family bonding trip," he said, his voice bitter. "But I had my suspicions. Charles had changed long before then. His ambition was greater than I'd ever imagined." He recounted how, in the cold forest, my father and Garrett led him to a remote stream. They said they wanted to stop and rest, but then, in a moment he hadn't anticipated, they pushed him into a ravine. I fell hard, but I didn't die. A shepherd living nearby found him, took him to his cabin, and tended to his wounds. I sat there, gripping the edge of the table, feeling like the world was turning upside down. "Dad and Garrett," I whispered. "They tried to kill you?" My grandfather nodded, his eyes darkening. "They thought I was dead. They needed me gone to take full control. Charles always wanted this company, Adam. He didn't just want to run it. He wanted to own it. To erase my name from Whitmore Dynamics' legacy." My throat tightened, tears welling up. "But why didn't you come back right away? Why did you let us think you were dead?" He placed a hand on my shoulder, his grip thin, but still strong. "I needed time, Adam. Time to gather evidence. Time to make sure that when I returned, Charles and Garrett wouldn't be able to deny it. I've spent 5 years in the shadows, reaching out to old friends, people still loyal to me. I have recordings, emails, documents, all proving their conspiracy." I cried, not out of sadness, but out of anger, pain, and a faint spark of hope igniting within me. My grandfather was alive. He was here, right in front of me, and he needed me. "What do you want me to do?" I asked, wiping my tears with the back of my hand. "I'll do anything to make this right." He looked at me, his eyes brightening slightly. "Adam, you're the only one I trust. You haven't been blinded by power. You have your mother's heart and my resolve. I want you to help me expose the truth, but it won't be easy. Charles and Garrett have influence, money, and they'll do anything to protect what they've built." I nodded, though a storm of emotions raged inside me. "I'll do it, Grandpa. I'll help you." He smiled for the first time that night, and I saw the man I'd always admired, the one who told me. "Good," he said. "But we need to be careful. Charles isn't a fool, and Garrett is even more dangerous. They can't know I'm back. Not until we're ready. A few days later, my grandfather took me to a small house on the outskirts of Austin where he was hiding. It was a modest wooden cabin tucked behind old oak trees, far from the city's bustle. He said he'd rented it through an intermediary to avoid detection. I still couldn't believe he was here, alive and breathing, after 5 years of thinking he was gone forever. Adam, there's one more person who needs to know the truth, he said, his voice lowering. Your mother? I froze. But you said not to tell anyone. He nodded. I did, but Clara is my daughter. She deserves to know, and I'm worried about her health. She needs something to give her strength to carry on. I agreed, though I was still uneasy. My mother was so frail, both physically and emotionally. Would the fact that my grandfather was alive outweigh the pain of the truth about my father and Garrett? I called my mother, telling her I wanted her to come to my apartment to talk. When she arrived, I gently explained that I had a special surprise and needed her to come with me. She looked at me, her eyes full of doubt, but she agreed. I drove her to the cabin, saying little. On the way, she sat beside me, her hands clasped tightly, her gaze distant. When we walked into the cabin, my grandfather was waiting in the living room. My mother saw him, and time seemed to stop. She froze, her lips trembling, then burst into tears. Dad, she whispered, rushing into his arms. My grandfather held her tightly, tears streaming down his weathered face. Clara, my daughter, I'm sorry for making you wait so long. I stood there watching them, feeling my heart break with both joy and pain. My mother sobbed as if all the grief of the past 5 years was pouring out. He told her everything, the hunting trip, the plot by my father and Garrett, and the years he'd spent in hiding. My mother listened, her face shifting from shock to pain and finally to anger. Charles, she whispered, her voice trembling with fury. He did this to you. My grandfather took her hand. Clara, I know this is hard to accept, but I need you to be strong. We're going to take back what belongs to this family, and Adam will help us. My mother turned to me, her eyes sparkling with a determination I hadn't seen in years. Adam, you're my hope. You have to do this. I nodded, feeling a new weight settle on my shoulders. This wasn't just my grandfather's fight. It was mine, my mother's, and the legacy my grandfather had built. In the days that followed, my grandfather and I began to plan. He showed me the evidence he'd collected over the past 5 years, emails between my father and Garrett, recordings of their conversations, and documents proving the illegal transfer of Whitmore Dynamics assets. Each piece of evidence was like a knife to the heart. I grew up in my father's arms, once admiring his intelligence and decisiveness, but now I saw only a traitor. My grandfather contacted a legal team he trusted, old friends from his days running the company. They helped us verify his legal identity, ensuring that when he reappeared, no one could question that he was Arthur Whitmore. They also prepared documents to sue my father and Garrett, accusing them of attempted murder, embezzlement, and destroying the company's legacy. Meanwhile, I secretly met with my mother every week, ensuring she was okay and not revealing any signs of my grandfather's return. She started eating better, and her eyes gradually regained their spark. Adam, I've never felt so alive, she said during one visit. Your grandfather is back, and I believe you'll do the right thing. But I couldn't deny the growing fear in my heart. My father and Garrett were not to be underestimated. They had money, power, and people willing to do anything to protect them. If I failed, not only would my grandfather and mother be in danger, but I could lose everything. One evening, as my grandfather and I reviewed the documents, he suddenly stopped and looked at me with a serious expression. Adam, I've rewritten my will, he said. I've revoked all previous authorizations, all the assets, shares, and control of the company. I'm leaving them to you. I was stunned. Grandpa, I'm not sure I can. He cut me off. You can, Adam. You're the only one I trust. You'll bring Whitmore Dynamics back to its rightful path. I believe in you. I didn't know what to say. The responsibility was immense, overwhelming. But looking into his eyes, I knew I couldn't refuse. This wasn't just about the company. It was about justice, about family, about righting the wrongs of the past. As I left the cabin that night, the rain had stopped, leaving a sky full of twinkling stars. I stood on the porch, breathing in the cool air, feeling a new strength coursing through my veins. My grandfather was back, and he had chosen me. I was no longer the outcast of the family. I was the one who would stand up, face my father and Garrett, and bring the truth to light. But I knew the real battle was still ahead, and it wouldn't be easy. 2 weeks later, a white envelope arrived at my apartment. I picked it up from the doormat, surprised to see the words, Marlowe Global, embossed on the paper. Inside was an invitation with handwritten lines in gold ink. You are cordially invited, Adam Marlowe, to attend the family reunion celebrating the 5th anniversary of the successful transition from Whitmore Dynamics to Marlowe Global. Time, 7 p.m. November 15th. Location, Marlowe Global Headquarters, Austin, Texas. I held the invitation, feeling as if it were burning my hand. A family reunion? Since when did my father and Garrett care about including me? For 5 years, they had pushed me out of everything, treating me like an outsider. Why were they inviting me now? I called my mother, the only person in the family I still trusted, to ask if she knew anything about this. Adam, I got an invitation too, she said over the phone, her voice frail, but tinged with determination. I'm going, and you should too. This is our chance to do what needs to be done. I understood what she meant. She knew the truth about my grandfather, about my father and Garrett's plot. And she wanted me to bring him to this event, not just for a reunion, but to expose everything. I went to my grandfather that same evening in the wooden cabin on the outskirts of town. He was sitting in an armchair, holding a cup of tea, his eyes lighting up when I told him about the invitation. This is our moment, Adam, he said, his voice low and resolute. Charles and Garrett think they've won. They want to flaunt their victory in front of the media, the shareholders. But they don't know I'm back, and we're going to make them pay. I nodded, my heart pounding. But Grandpa, what if they suspect something? What if they find out about you before we're ready? He placed a hand on my shoulder, his gaze piercing through me. Adam, I survived 5 years in the shadows. I know how to keep a secret. And you? You're the one who will stand with me. We have the evidence, the truth, and Clara will do this. In the days leading up to the event, my grandfather and I worked tirelessly. We met with the legal team he had contacted, a group of seasoned lawyers who had worked with him during Whitmore Dynamics' heyday. They helped us organize the evidence, recordings of my father and Garrett discussing their plan to eliminate my grandfather, emails detailing illegal transactions, and asset maps showing how they had unlawfully transferred company shares. Each piece of evidence was like a bullet, ready to be fired at the right moment. I also met with my mother in secret several times to ensure she was strong enough to face what was coming. She had changed since reuniting with my grandfather. She was no longer the frail, quiet woman I'd known. A small fire burned in her eyes, though I knew she was still pained by the thought of my father's betrayal. Adam, I'm not sure I want to do this, she said during one meeting at my apartment, her hands clasped tightly together. But I have to. For your grandfather, for you, and for myself. I hugged her, feeling the fragile but fierce determination within her. Mom, I'll be with you. Grandpa will be too. We'll get through this together. On the evening of November 15th, I stood in front of the mirror in my apartment, putting on a navy blue suit I rarely touched. I looked at myself, barely recognizing the man with cold eyes and tense shoulders. I was no longer Adam Marlowe, the education consultant living a quiet life. I was Adam Marlowe, the man who would walk into the lion's den, armed with the truth, to bring down those who had betrayed my family. I drove to Marlowe Global's headquarters, my heart pounding. The glass building glowed